So these metal detectors or knife arches or knife scanners or any other kind of scanners are causing quite a bit of a discussion around the country because they raise a couple of important questions. Can you be forced to go through them, and can you be searched if you refuse to go through them? And the answer to both of those questions is not really straightforward. There is a straightforward answer, but it would be remiss of me to give you the straightforward answer and not give you the long answer, which is usually what you stick to my channel for, hopefully at least. And for that alone, please do hit the subscribe button. Let's talk about whether you can be searched. Now, I'm using this video as opposed to a different one that I was sent by a rather argumentative and obnoxious auditor who saw nothing better with his time than to argue with the police and film it for views on YouTube. But by the by, he was at least right in part in that they can't force him to go through the arch. Now, these have been put up around the country under various different schemes, such as Operation Fearless. This one here was in Warsaw. Ironically enough, using money seized from criminals to pay for the arch to then detect further criminals. I do enjoy the irony of that. But other operations as well have sought the use of knife arches, scanners, handheld scanners, and other devices. I'll come back to some of those in a moment. Now, first of all, there's a general power of search under Section 1 of PACE, which in the video that I watched, this was the ground that was used. Now, just to be clear, refusing to go through an arch by itself should not reasonably amount to the grounds required for a search under PACE. Now, we can all say that surely if you've got nothing to hide, you shouldn't worry about going through one of these scanners. But at the same time, some people do just object to going through these scanners. They are worried about the scanners, or they don't know whether they cause any harm, or they just don't want to go through them. Most people comply, and with most people, there isn't a problem. The question only really arises is when somebody refuses to go through one of those scanners, it raises the obvious question, why do they not want to go through the scanner? But as I said, refusing to go through it and walking to the side of it by itself is not really going to be sufficient grounds for a search under PACE. A search under PACE, under Section 1, requires the bit in yellow, which is reasonable grounds to suspect that they'll find stolen or prohibited articles. And so it really needs to be linked to some kind of intelligence or information either about the person, or it can be the behavior, which I'll come back to in a minute. There are all sorts of factors that might amount to reasonable grounds for suspicion for a search under Section 1 of PACE. That's not the only power of search. I'll come back to another very much broader one in a minute. But under Section 1, the officer must genuinely suspect, not just think, well, they refuse to go through, so they must have something to hide. They must genuinely suspect that they will find an item that they are searching for. And it must be objectively, as in any ordinary reasonable person with the same set of facts would come to the same set of conclusion, would come to the same conclusion if they had all the same information. That's an objective test, not just what the police officer thought, but if you explain that situation to somebody else, would somebody else come to the same conclusion? And so if you take the scenario where somebody flat out refused to go through the arch and is shouting and screaming at the officers, you can't make me go through there, this is ridiculous, I'm a member of the public, you can't force me to go through there, I'm going this way, and trying to force their way through, arguing the police officer, shouting and swearing, and, shouting and swearing itself is not enough by itself, you understand, but a whole combination of those factors may then give rise to reasonable grounds that that person is carrying something that they should not have. And so in the scenario where someone is being really argumentative and refusing to go through the arch, that might give rise to a reasonable ground for suspicion to search somebody under Section 1 of PACE. But there may be a question as to whether they were lawful when they tried to force the person to go through the arch in the first place. That is certainly one of the questions that I would raise. Now, in the scenario where there is a heightened alert in a particular area, a high-ranking police officer may authorize a Section 60 order which includes powers to stop and search in anticipation either before or after the use of violence. This is under the Criminal Justice and Public Order Act of 1994. The key difference here is they do not need those reasonable grounds of suspicion in that particular area. Now, the initial authorization should last for no longer than 24 hours, and it can be quite a wide area. In fact, I can show you one such area if I find it on the correct tab. There's one such area here where a Section 60 power was deployed across the whole of Warsaw, quite a wide area, because they were anticipating violence because somebody had been stabbed, and so they'd authorize this Section 60 to stop, search anybody within that area. But even then, the use of these arches and scanners and so on should be generally voluntary unless there were a specific legal requirement or condition or court order or such to use them. However, if there was a Section 60 authorization in place, they could then just search somebody without any reasonable suspicion just because they refused to go through the arch, for example. So they could put the arch up as a preliminary thing, and if someone refused to go through it, then they could search them. But if they refused to go through it and nothing more, that by itself wouldn't be enough for a search under Section 1 of PACE. And of course, along with any power, there are duties upon the police officers, and you have rights as well. And ordinarily, if the police ask you who you are, what you're doing there, where you're going, etc., you don't generally have to answer those questions. And if there's no other reason to suspect you, then this alone cannot be used as a reason to search or even arrest you. However, in combination with other things, for example, not using the arch, and then if your behavior towards the police is erratic and disturbing the peace in that area, then all of those things taken together may give rise to a reasonable belief that you're carrying something that you're not supposed to have, and therefore they might search you. But interestingly enough, they're also talking about portable scanners that might help police to detect weapons hidden on people from a distance, so they don't even have to go through these arches or scanners in the first place. But I think we can all agree that we've got to a stage in the UK where the streets are just generally not very safe anymore. Just yesterday, I had a guy walk past me, and whilst I can't tell you for a definitive fact because I didn't see the metal blade, but the guy did have a very long thing down the left-hand side of his trousers. No sniggering at the back there, but this was quite definitively, in my view, something that he shouldn't have with him. And I think you've all seen by now the photographs and the videos of these huge, ridiculous knives that have been confiscated from people just walking around the streets that have no business being on the streets. And this is why there is a move towards these arches and everything else. And so I come back to the very basic premise of, if you have nothing to hide, why would you not go through the scanner? It's not exactly an X-ray device or anything like that. It is a simple metal detector that will beep if there's a certain amount of metal on your person. And more than anything else, they are really just a deterrent, because someone who does have a large knife on them is obviously not going to want to go through one of these scanners. That is just a little bit of common sense, really. But I do appreciate that there are mixed views on this. On the one hand, it seems a little bit authoritarian, but on the other hand, it's a small step to try to keep the streets safe. And they do say that they've seen a huge reduction of the number of weapons on the streets because they're using these as deterrents. So let me know in the comment section what you think. Would you be happy to walk through one of these, or would you stand your ground and force your way around the side? I've done several other videos on your rights if you are searched. I will link those below as well, and the times and places that police can and cannot search you. But I hope that was a very simple overview. Please do like the video and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.